Victor Frankenstein has just stepped into the territory of a god, stitching together human remains and giving them life, but he can't stand the sight of his own hideous creation. From here, Frankenstein's life unravels as the monster slowly takes everything he's ever loved away from him. Meanwhile, the monster himself questions his place in the world, an 8-foot-tall superhuman being who's ugly and scorned by humanity, and his creator. This all culminates in a chilling tale that's disturbing and tragic. This is Mary Shelley's frightening story seen through the lens of one of the most iconic horror authors. This is Junji Ito's Frankenstein. Hello friends, this is Grief speaking, and today I'm covering Junji Ito's Frankenstein. I recently read the original 1818 novel by Mary Shelley and thought it would be fun to do a breakdown. Since Junji Ito's version is extremely faithful to the novel, other than a few changes, I thought it was the perfect way to cover Mary Shelley's original story, but still have some creepy visuals on screen at the same time. While we will be going through the manga, I'll be pointing out major differences and details in the hopes that this will not only provide good coverage of Junji Ito's version, but at the same time give you the basic idea of what happens in the novel as well. So I hope you enjoyed this telling of the story as much as I did. This is Junji Ito's Frankenstein Explained. Before we get into the manga, I'm excited to say that this video is sponsored by Raycon, and that's because I've actually used their earbuds for years now. I own multiple pairs for different situations, and honestly, I was probably wearing them while working on this video. The everyday earbuds have become essential for me. I hate having to constantly charge electronics, so I was shocked at how long these last. 8 hours of playtime and 32 total with the charging case. They're water resistant, have easy to use button controls, and can even pair with 2 devices at once, which is great for being connected to my computer and phone at the same time. I also do a lot of writing and research for these videos, and the active noise canceling feature helps me stay completely zoned in when I'm trying to focus. On the other hand, when I need to stay aware, the awareness mode is perfect, especially when I'm out walking or doing chores. The everyday buds come in some really cool colors like royal blue, rose gold, blush violet, and mint, but I had to stick with the carbon black to match the suit. You can also pick up one of their protective cases that come in a variety of patterns, like my favorite, Galaxy. Even with all of these features, Raycons are at half the price of other premium audio brands. Right now, to celebrate Raycon's 8th anniversary, you can get 20% off the Everyday Earbuds Classic. Just go to buyraycon.com/grief, that's buyraycon.com/grief to get 20% off your own pair. So once again, big thank you to Raycon for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into Junji Ito's Frankenstein. It's a cold, rainy night, and Victor Frankenstein is hard at work performing a miracle. At long last, he's unlocked the mysteries of life, and he loudly declares that tonight he has become a god. In front of him is a large bandaged figure. Its putrid, hazy eyes begin to open. What an eerie start. Next, we see a ship traveling north through icy waters. This expedition is led by a man named Walton. Apparently, he's prepared for this trip much of his young life, and finally had the ability to pursue his dreams of traveling to the North Pole. His first mate questions whether there really is something worth finding out there, but Walton assures him, saying many believe that if you travel far enough through the ice, you'll find a land of wonders. As they speak, the boat hits a large ice patch on the sea, and Walton looks discouraged, wondering how long they'll be stuck. Just then, one of the crew members spots something out on the ice, a series of shadows passing over the whiteness. On a closer look, it appears to be dozens of dogs pulling a sled. It's strange that someone would be traveling this far from civilization, and even stranger is that of the man's stature. He seems to be the size of a giant, nearly 8 foot tall. The man disappears into the snow, leaving Walton to wonder who this man was and what he was doing. Later, as he writes a letter in his cabin, the sound of ice breaking outside raises Walton's spirits. When he ventures out to see the progress, he finds the ship's crew gathered and looking over the side. Down below is a man on a drifting mass of ice with only one dog left on his sled. Everyone agrees, though, this is not the same person they saw the day before. Below, they see the serious face of a man peering up at them. He refuses to get on the ship or to be saved until he hears that they're traveling north. In that case, he agrees to board the ship. Inside, Walton has wrapped the man in blankets and laid him near the fire to recover. At this point, he's emaciated and lacks any strength. It looks like he's been through hell, and it's surprising that he's not dead. Walton asks him what it is he seeks to accomplish in this desolate place, and the ragged man says that he seeks the one who fled from him, the demon. Curious, Walton wonders if the man he seeks Beaks is of enormous stature, and says that they saw such a man on the ice the previous day. At this point, Walton asks for his name, and of course it's none other than Victor Frankenstein. After a few days on the ship, Victor has recovered quite a bit, and though he can barely walk, obsessively looks out with a telescope, hoping to spot the monster he chases. Him and Walton have gotten on quite well. Despite Frankenstein's outward appearance and seriousness, Walton sees in his eyes the remains of a good man. Inside, Walton discusses his plans to make discoveries at the North Pole and perhaps solve the mysteries of nature. This seems to trouble Frankenstein, who believes that Walton is on the same path he once was, seeking for knowledge and wisdom. But he warns Walton the results are that of the sick and troubled man that lay before him. This prompts Frankenstein to tell Walton his story and how he got to this point, hoping he may derive some moral from it. So he begins his tale of how great his ambition was and how he lost everything. Victor Frankenstein's childhood was a happy one. His family was wealthy and lived in the beautiful countryside of Geneva, Switzerland. At age 5, his family adopted a young girl named Elizabeth. She understood Victor well and they adored each other. Along with his best friend Henry, the three grew up together happily. At a young age, Victor developed a passion for natural philosophy after finding a book by Cornelius Agrippa. His father found the book outdated and called it sad trash, which kinda made me laugh. But this didn't stop Victor from obsessively reading more, dreaming one day of discovering the Philosopher's Stone and the Elixir of Life. While authors like Agrippa and Paracelsus were seen as out of touch with modern science, these authors and their otherworldly ambitions are a fundamental part of Frankenstein's eventual discovery. When he was 15, lightning struck the tree in the Frankenstein's garden. Their dinner guest, a natural philosopher, found it to be an exhilarating experience and went on to explain the recent scientific theory of Galvani called animal electricity. This, of course, was very real and controversial at the time, as Galvani showed that the muscles of a corpse could be reanimated using electrodes. The most famous example was that of frog legs moving around without a head. Anyway, this discussion leads Frankenstein to abandon these old ideas. As he looks at the scorched tree in the garden, he declares that he's wasted his time. Around the time Victor became an adult, his mother had gotten very ill and was tended to by the family maid Justine, who everyone adored. This is actually an important detail, as Justine has a big role to play later on. Soon, Victor's mother lay on her deathbed with her final wish being that Victor and Elizabeth be married, something she apparently planned from the beginning. After the passing of his mother, Victor decided to study at university and ventured off to Ingolstadt, Germany to commence his education. It's here that the true horror begins. This is where he met Professor Waldman, a man who, instead of disregarding the old philosophers like Agrippa, actually credited them with helping to develop the modern scientific theories. This merriment of the new and old scientists ignited a spark in Victor, who decided with an enthusiastic ambition that he too will do something great, going so far as to declare that he will be stepping into the territory of a god. After this, he began to feverishly dive into his study, and his talent was soon respected by even the masters. In his singular pursuit, the university had become no longer conducive to his studies. He needed further independent research and decided he would need a cemetery for his purposes. This eerie panel of Frankenstein looking out at the gravestones is really the start of his inevitable downfall. Frankenstein enters the cemetery and after this visits the tombs almost every night to investigate the process of physical decomposition. As he looks at the rotting corpses, we get some pretty detailed panels in that gritty Junji Ito style. It's disgusting. After days of this, Victor gazes upon another corpse and says that he finally understands it. He looks up at God and says that tonight he stands alongside him. He finally discovered the secret of life. By the way, same as the novel, we never learn exactly what the secret is. In the movies, it's often harnessing the power of lightning or something like that, but here something just clicks and Frankenstein knows how to form life. After this discovery, he rents out an apartment room at the very back of the top floor, trying his best to stay away from prying eyes. One night in the cemetery, the groundskeeper hears a strange noise coming from the morgue, believing it to be some kind of ghoul. He looks inside to see a figure coming up from the darkness. It's Frankenstein, covered in blood and carrying a sack. The man falls to the ground, believing that his fears are confirmed, that it's a vampire or monster of some sort. Frankenstein leaves in a dash, and the keeper calls the authorities. They investigate the tombs to find the bodies inside mutilated and missing limbs and organs, an act that baffles them. Later, we see Victor writing in his room while body parts are strewn about the floor. He says that he can make easier progress with the work if the body is larger and predicts it to be about 8 feet tall. He says that he can't use an expired brain and instead will have to create one from nothing, a feat that's now possible with his discoveries. He's still short on some organs and will have to use animal parts to make up for it. In a montage, we see him getting to work on his new project, sewing up limbs and attempting to construct a brain. At one point, he gets something wrong and in frustration smashes the brain with his fist. Gross. Finally, he begins to stitch up some of the parts, making a massive torso, and at the same time constructing a head around his brain. Finally, on a rainy night in November, the body is fully constructed, and it's quite a sight. It's huge and covered in bandages, except for some grotesque patches of sewn flesh that are still visible. It's a dark image, making great use of Ito's drawing style. Frankenstein deems it the ultimate creation. He then connects an instrument to the creature using a set of wires, and suddenly, its eyes open. The body begins to sit up, its flesh twisting as it does, and the wrappings fall from its face. Frankenstein looks at it with horror as it slowly turns around. Life is now behind the hideous eyes of this monster. The huge creature begins to move toward Victor, making disturbing guttural noises, and next thing we know, Victor wakes up in his bed. His friend Henry has been caring for him. Apparently, he came to study in Ingolstadt and sought out Victor. However, he found him lying face down in the street outside of the apartment building. So he carried him to his bed, and Victor slept for an entire day. It seems the shock of his creation, as well as the utter exhaustion from the process, finally took its toll. Victor shoots up from bed, terrified that the monster is still in the next room, or that Henry has seen the abomination he created. Henry had entered the room the monster was in, but saw nothing but broken equipment and blood. The memory of what happened rushes back into Victor's head, how he was unable to endure the disgusting nature of the monster he had created. He had run outside in terror and fainted on the street. Realizing now that the beast had left puts him at such ease that he lets out a laugh, but shortly after faints again. From here, Victor was ill and confined to bed for 6 months, haunted by the face of the monster and hoping to God he had died, unable to survive alone in the wild. Victor finally recovers with the help of his friend Henry, who looks after him, and he feels horribly guilty for consuming all of Henry's time since he's been in Germany. Henry only asks that he write back to his family, who have been worried about him, especially Elizabeth. After reading a kind letter from her, Victor's spirits are raised. Gradually, the horrible events of that night in his apartment faded, and he resolved to study a wholly different subject from natural philosophy. Back in Switzerland, we see Victor's father, along with Elizabeth and his kid brother William, having a picnic in the nearby woods. William asks Elizabeth about a locket she keeps around her neck, and Elizabeth reveals it to contain a portrait of William and Victor's late mother. William asks if he can hold it, and as soon as he gets it in his grasp, he shouts that it's his and runs off laughing. It's all in good fun, and this turns into a game of hide and seek as Elizabeth looks for him in the woods. While William hides behind a tree looking at the locket, a large figure approaches him. He looks up to see Frankenstein's monster shrouded in a cloak and standing as tall as a tree himself. It's an intimidating sight. Back in Germany, Victor gets a letter from his father and learns that his dear brother has been murdered. At this news, he feels he has no choice but to return home to comfort his family. While he travels back to Geneva, his father and Elizabeth are in shambles over the death of the boy. As they lament, the authorities arrive and declare they've found the culprit. Shockingly, they believe Justine, the family maid, to be the killer. Apparently, the locket that William held at the time of his death was found in Justine's pocket. This is pretty damning evidence, and despite Justine's pleas, she's taken to jail to await a trial. If she's found guilty, she'll be put to death. Meanwhile, Victor arrives in his homeland and travels past the very park which William was murdered in. He stops the carriage and walks into the dark woods, falling on his knees and mourning, wondering who killed his brother. Then from the nearby bushes, a figure emerges. It's the horrifying face of the demon, watching Victor with his glossy eyes before creeping away back into the woods. Victor chases the monster to a dead end at the side of a steep mountain, but the creature begins climbing it with superhuman speed and agility, disappearing over the top. Victor arrives at his family home, still shaken from what happened in the park. His father and Elizabeth are still upset about Justine, but have no choice given the evidence but believe her to be the killer. Victor tells them they're all mistaken. He knows the true killer. Still, he can't prove this, and if he did tell them who he thought it was, he would likely look like a madman. At the trial, Justine honestly defends herself, though she can't account for the locket that she possessed, and ultimately, she's found guilty for the crime and sentenced to death. Before her execution, Victor and Elizabeth visit her, and she's surprisingly at peace, saying at least she'll be with Victor's mother and William. The time comes, and Justine is walked to the guillotine to be beheaded. Victor can't help but feel responsible for her death, as well as William's, for it was his creation that did the deed. Overwhelmed with emotions, Victor begins to walk through the wild until he finds himself on a small mountaintop. As he stares over the cliff edge, he begins to hear deep and horrible laughter, turning around to see a massive hooded figure approach. The monster pulls off his hood to reveal his horrible disfigured face. At the sight of the demon, Victor picks up a rock intended as a weapon. Surprisingly, the monster begins to speak. speak, asking Victor to hear his tale, and says that Frankenstein created him and therefore he has a responsibility as his maker to listen. Victor is still angry and replies that his only responsibility is to destroy his creation. He swings the rock at the monster, who easily evades him and grabs his arm, forcing him to drop it. As the monster does this, his cloak blows up, revealing his stitched up body underneath. He tells Frankenstein it's no use fighting and tells him to listen to him, and then, if he can or will, he can destroy the work of his own hands. With not much choice, the monster leads Frankenstein to his dwelling, a lone shack in the mountains. Inside, the monster throws a bear's arm in front of Frankenstein for eating, I guess. It's one of the craziest and scariest images in this manga, as Victor looks over to see the huge creature chewing off the face of a brown bear in gory detail. He tells Victor that thanks to his powerful body, he can even kill a bear with his hands, but at the same time, his ugliness makes people fear and loathe him. From here, he begins his tale, starting at the night that he came into being. He had no understanding of anything really, other than it was cold, so he grabbed some of Victor's clothes and wandered outside. In the novel, he goes even further, explaining how utterly confusing it was, not being able to distinguish between his senses. This was the beginning of his agony. He eventually ventured through the woods, surviving on fruit and small animals. His first run-in with humans went as you might expect. The lumbering giant just walks into a cabin while a family is eating and scares the absolute shit out of him. They run away and he starts consuming their food, but before long they come back with a mob who starts attacking him. After a few similar encounters, the creature finally saw his face in the reflection of a pool and understood that he looked different from them, and his hideous nature is what scared them. Eventually, the monster found a place to hide in a shed attached to an isolated cabin. From inside, he began to spy on the family that dwelt there, an old blind man and 2 adult children who seemed to be on hard times. Since no one seemed to ever enter the shed, the creature stayed there for quite a while. As you listen to the family, he slowly learned about language and soon began to understand them. It was clear that they had suffered some misfortune, and the creature was filled with sorrow upon seeing their grief. At night, he would collect firewood for them, as well as clearing the path when it snowed. To the family, this seemed like something from folklore, and they believed it to be the work of fairies. One day, there was a big change when a woman arrived. Apparently, this was the son's lover, and they had been separated due to unfortunate circumstances. The woman was actually from another country, and every evening, the son would teach her his language and alphabet. So the creature also took these lessons through the wall, unbeknownst to them, and he actually learned the language faster than the woman even. At this point, the monster was hit upon by a sudden burning question. What exactly is he? He's unlike humans. If God made them, then who made him? Searching through the clothing he took from Frankenstein's apartment, the monster found a journal. Inside, he learned all about his creation and the name of his maker, Victor Frankenstein. The monster's existential crisis continues as he wonders why Frankenstein would make him so ugly and cursed to be alone. He wanted a family so bad, people to sympathize with him. So he hatched a plan. He would enter the family's home while the blind old man was alone, hoping that without seeing him, he would have a chance to make friends and explain his wretched appearance. You can really see how big the monster is as he kneels down in front of the little old man. The conversation seems to go well. The creature explains how he wants to visit a kind and loving family, but is afraid that they will not accept him for he's been persecuted by many. The old man sympathizes and says that he and his family have also seen misfortune, and encourages the creature to pursue this meeting, not knowing that it's his family that the creature's talking about. The monster's overjoyed at these words and grabs the old man, telling him it's his family that he wishes to befriend. However, just then, the others show up and see what looks like a hideous creature attacking their blind father. The son pulls the monster off and begins attacking him. Although the monster could easily tear this guy limb from limb, he runs away crying, his plan foiled, and the family he grew to love now hating him. Yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking, and this story does not let up. It's a tragedy through and through. After this incident, the monster declared that he would get revenge on humanity that had made him suffer so much, and his terrible creator. From the journal, the monster learned that Frankenstein was from Geneva, and so journeyed there with revenge in his heart. Finally, when he arrived, he came upon a family in the park. He waited until the little boy was alone, and then strangled him to death. Of course, this is William, and we can see his small body drop to the ground with a sickening thud. The monster finds the locket on the boy and grabs it. He then finds a young maid sleeping in a barn and slips the locket in her apron. This is how Justine ended up with it, and it was in fact the monster that killed William. While this was a rageful act, it actually was purely coincidental. The monster finishes his tale here and says that although humanity is now his enemy, his creator alone can save him. He then puts forth a request to Frankenstein, that he make another creature in the likeness of him, but a woman. That's right, baby, the bride of Frankenstein. Victor's in shock at this and can't believe what he's hearing. The creature says again that he wants a woman, someone to ease his loneliness. Just as God made Adam and Eve, he believes Frankenstein has a duty to make another. Victor refuses and says that no form of torture would get him to consent to this, and that all he produced was an ugly lump of flesh. The monster replies that he may be a lump of flesh, but he's also intelligent. He tells Victor that if he refuses, he will work at his destruction and desolate his heart until he curses the day he was born. On the other hand, if he obliges this request, he will take his bride to the wilds of South Africa, where they will be isolated from humanity, never harming another soul again. Victor is still uneasy and not sure if he can take the creature at his word. After all, what if he were to make another being like this and the two of them work together to undo humanity, or worse, begin to breed and take over the earth? The creature says that with the love of a companion, hatred will be snuffed out of his heart, and he pleads with Victor, saying he needs to be saved and he's the only one who can do it. Sympathizing with the creature and not really seeing a better option, Victor finally consents to the monster's demand. The demon is overjoyed and tells Frankenstein that he will watch from afar and arrive when the woman is ready. Returning home, Victor starts to go over the logistics of his new project. Surely he couldn't do it here and would need a place far from others, a laboratory where he could start his work. The next issue is gathering materials. In Germany, he was so caught up in his ambition that he hardly was affected by the grave robbing, but now he wonders if he has the stomach for such a terrible act. While he thinks all of this over, his father approaches him with an important topic. He reminds Victor of what his mother wished for on her deathbed, and asks Victor to be honest. Does he truly have feelings for Elizabeth? Victor truthfully tells his father that he is absolutely in love with Elizabeth, and she's the only woman he could ever marry. With this, his father suggests that they get married immediately then. Victor agrees, but first must complete his project, so he asks his father if it's okay that he travels to England and will marry Elizabeth when he returns. The day comes where Victor is about to depart when his friend Henry shows up to surprise him. He plans on coming along. This would be wonderful news, but instead it's a bit of a roadblock as Victor has to find a reason to get away from him to start on the bride. After they arrive in England, Victor just tells Henry he needs time alone, maybe a month or so, and that they'll meet up again afterwards. Henry is suspicious but agrees, and so Frankenstein heads out to find a laboratory. He happens upon an old and abandoned building next to a cemetery out in the country and decides it would be a perfect place. In another stroke of luck, as he arrives, he sees a funeral in session of 4 young women who were killed in a landslide. Fresh female corpses ripe for the picking to create the monster's bride. Victor digs up the graves and collects the bodies to bring them to his lab, constantly apologizing to the dead for doing so. While the bodies will work well for taking limbs and organs, the heads of the women have been crushed in the accident. It's pretty disturbing even with the bandages covering them. Even so, he begins stitching together the bride's body and once again profusely apologizing to these poor sacrifices. Soon the massive female body is almost complete and he gives it enormous breasts for some reason. I guess he's trying to throw the monster a bone or something. It's almost comical. Anyway, after working non-stop, Frankenstein is overcome with exhaustion and falls asleep where he dreams about Justine's death, and here we actually see her head get sliced off. When he wakes up, he starts trying to finish the body by putting the last arm on when Henry shows up unexpectedly and sees everything. Victor has no choice but to explain the whole story to Henry, and the dude is surprisingly chill about the whole thing. He even says he'll help Victor finish the bride, seeing that as the best possible option. Talk about a good friend. So the two continue grave robbing at night in search of a usable head for the creature. Unfortunately, they can't find any candidates. Just as they start to give up hope, the monster shows up out of the blue. The daunting figure crouches inside the lab and holds up a severed head. Apparently, he'd been watching their progress and saw that they lacked materials. So he plops down the woman's head, which he says he found in a Swiss cemetery, and he leaves. The men walk over to take a look at it and are shocked to find that it's Justine's. This enrages Victor, who accuses the monster of picking her head intentionally to torment him. It's unclear whether this is actually the case or it's just a coincidence. Henry surprisingly convinces Frankenstein that this is a good thing and could give Justine another shot at life since she was taken unjustly. Victor decides to go along with this, but like the other creature, he still must make a new brain and is worried that this monster will also become violent. Either way, they've got nothing to lose and resolve to make the bride with Justine's head and to raise her up pure and sweet. After the body is complete, they connect several instruments to it, and soon Her eyes open. Immediately, Victor tells her her name is Justine and tells her that she is kind and gentle. At the same time, the monster peers in through the door with a terrifying grin. Victor helps the gigantic woman up, but as he does, she grabs some nearby scissors and stabs Victor in the arm with them. She stands up and removes the bandages from her head, revealing wild hair and stitches all around. She then lets out a blood-curdling moan, and the original monster moves in on her with a creepy smile. However, when the bride sees his face, she's horrified. Even his bride, made in the same likeness, finds him hideous. The bride then uses the scissors to slash at the monster and bares her teeth in a devilish display. The monster angrily grabs her and strangles her until the stitches all come undone and her body crumbles into a pile of parts on the floor. He turns to Victor in anger and accuses him of making the bride just to try to destroy him instead of being his companion. He declares that it is now his turn for revenge and says that Victor will lose everything he loves. He leaves, and Victor realizes what this means, that the monster intends to kill his father and Elizabeth. Victor can barely move due to his wound, but Henry takes the carriage after the creature to try and stop him. Victor struggles his way down the road until he comes upon the carriage, which is now smashed, and Henry laying dead. Victor returned home after this to, sure enough, find his father and Elizabeth slain as well. Elizabeth's death is particularly tragic as she was wearing her bridal gown in anticipation for Victor's return. As he discovers her body, he hears ominous laughter and sees the monster peering through the window with a smile, pointing at Victor's dead bride and laughing. It then takes us out of the story and back on Walton's ship, where Victor concludes his story by saying that he vowed to follow the creature to kill it or be killed by it, and that the monster intentionally has been running to the cold north in order to torture Victor. After telling this story, Victor doesn't look too hot and collapses in exhaustion. Walton heads up top and is surrounded by the men who demand that he turn the ship around. The ice is only getting worse, and some men have already died due to the cold. So Walton has no choice but to turn around lest he be responsible for more deaths. In the cabin, Walton pleads with Frankenstein to quit his revenge mission and return home with him where they can face defeat together as friends. But Victor says that the only path left for him is to destroy the monster he created. He then lets out a long sigh and goes silent. Back up top, Bosun asks Walton what will happen to Frankenstein. Will he continue alone in pursuit of the monster? Walton then informs him that Frankenstein just died a few moments ago. Just then, a loud wailing rings out from the ice. The men look over the ship to see the monster standing in the snow, crying his eyes out and screaming in despair. He somehow sensed the passing of his maker and yells out that there is no one now. He is completely alone. But soon, this suffering too shall end. Walton says that the figure slowly faded as their ship sailed away, and that is the end of Junji Ito's Frankenstein. As I said, it is an utter tragedy through and through. One of the things you may notice here is how totally different this story is from the film adaptations that brought the monster into pop culture, especially the 1931 film starring Boris Karloff as the monster. This is easily the most iconic version of Frankenstein, and I was shocked reading the book and subsequently Ito's adaptation at how different that movie is from its source material. While it shares some key moments and themes, it's almost a different story. I could do a whole video talking about the differences there, but since we're talking Junji Ito's manga version, let's focus on differences between the manga and the book. As I mentioned before, it may be the best adaptation of the story in another medium. It pretty much goes through the book beat for beat and doesn't even try to incorporate some of the later Frankenstein imagery like the crazy mad scientist lab or lightning bringing the creature to life. That being said, there are some differences from the original 1818 novel that are worth noting. Some of these I alluded to while going through the manga, but let's just run down the list. Most of the differences are actually in what was and wasn't included. The novel takes on average around 5 to 6 hours to read, and the manga takes about an hour or less. So obviously you can't squeeze every detail in. I mean, for God's sake, the book has 4 chapters just dedicated to the monster spying on the family in the cottage. For the most part, what's left out doesn't affect the story at all. A lot of it is poetic and philosophical monologues that Victor and the monster go on, which are very fascinating, but don't translate well to the comic format, which is mostly visual storytelling. One important moment that's missing from the manga, however, is the drowning girl. Funny enough, this is actually in the 1931 film. When the monster leaves the family after being attacked by the sun, he later comes upon a girl drowning drowning in a lake and saves her. Instead of getting thanks from her father, the man straight up pulls out a gun and shoots him. After this, the monster finds William and strangles him, although in the book this act is more heavily provoked. He actually tries to befriend William, but the boy won't stop insulting him, calling him a disgusting ogre. Unlike the manga, he also mentions that his father's name is Mr. Frankenstein, and upon hearing the name of his creator, who he's seeking revenge on, he chokes the kid out. Another big change that's maybe the biggest difference in this version is that in the novel, Henry never helps Frankenstein. Other than Walton, no one ever finds out what Frankenstein has done. While Henry does accompany him to England, he never checks up on Frankenstein and therefore never offers to help make the bride. The other major change has to do with the bride herself. In the novel, Frankenstein does build the body of the bride, but she doesn't have Justine's head. And more importantly, before Frankenstein even gives her life, he's overwhelmed with guilt and horror, and so he smashes the corpse to pieces himself. Of course, the monster witnesses this, and it sends him on his revenge mission to kill Victor's family. So the events shake out the same way, but the whole thing with Justine's head on the bride, that's all Junji Ito. And honestly, I kind of like it. There's some more minor differences, but they're mostly just ways of condensing the story. Like how after the events of Justine's death, the Frankenstein family take a vacation to France to try and raise their spirits, and this is where he encounters the monster on the mountaintop who had followed him there, as opposed to the manga where he simply wanders onto a mountain in Switzerland and finds the creature there. Now, we've talked about the things that were missing from the adaptation, but what about the things that were added? I already mentioned Henry and the bride, but the major addition here that feels more in line with some of the movies and also fleshes out the story in a good way is Frankenstein's grave robbing. The book surprisingly skims over him collecting the body parts, maybe because it was too shocking in the 1800s to add gory details or something, but it was cool to see Junji Ito fill in the blanks and really display the depravity of the act here in the manga. I also love the gravekeeper thinking that Frankenstein is a monster when he exits the tombs covered in blood. It plays into the classic question of who the real monster is in this story. So there you have it, folks. After watching this, you should more or less have a fairly comprehensive understanding of the original Frankenstein story, one that I think more people should definitely take the time to check out. You can buy Junji Ito's Frankenstein collection, which actually includes some bonus stories that are great, but also do yourself a favor and read Mary Shelley's original story. You can find it for free online pretty easily since it's in the public domain, and there are also a lot of really cool physical versions as well. Shout out to Kill Me Katie as always for the intro and outro music, which is likely playing right now. And if you want to see your art at the end of my videos, email me a submission to the address below with a name or social media handle. But I appreciate you guys watching at all. This is Grease speaking. Goodbye, friends.